Hey everybody. If you've been following my content on this channel, you'll know that for the last few months, I've been calling for the SPLC and others to be sued for creating outrage mobs and dishonestly defaming those who they disagree with. In my video, The SPLC Funds Terrorists, I showed how the SPLC leadership admits that they label hate groups not based on facts or conduct, but based on ideological disagreement alone. Then, once labeled as a hate group, the SPLC works to deplatform and destroy these targets. So, after calling for the targets of the SPLC's outrage mob to sue them for months, guess what? It's finally happened. Apparently, somebody heard me. Somebody did their homework and verified my concerns. And now, the SPLC is the subject of at least 3 lawsuits that were filed in about the last month or so. The first of which this video will cover, and we're going to be doing a series on this. However, before we get started, I need to say something. I'm no stranger to outrage mobs. In 2017, when I published my Amazon bestseller, The Feminist Lie, feminists formed an outrage mob and attacked me on social media. They even tried to dox me. They got the wrong person. They got an IT book author instead. Then, in 2018, when I spoke out against racists who were attempting to infiltrate and rebrand the online MGTOW community as a racist group and falsely claimed I was a doxer, I got outrage mobbed again. This group also tried to dox me. Instead, they found a 70-year-old musician from the 80s band called Devo who had the same name as my pen name. Then recently, a few days ago, I spoke out in disagreement to the idea of taking women's rights away as a MGTOW core concept. This is because men going their own way, men who are actually attempting to live full lives free from female validation and female influence, don't and shouldn't care about what women think and what women do. I said then, and I believe today, that those who advocate taking women's rights away, regardless of how it's attempted, are in reality focused on women and attempting to gain power over them, rather than focusing on living free from female influence or validation. Predictably, yet again, I was outrage mobbed. In fact, they even threatened to boycott my sponsor, the Dollhouse, forcing him to discontinue sponsorship. It didn't matter that the owner of the Dollhouse publicly admitted that the false allegations against me were without merit. In other words, they were Me Too lies told to defame me and my character. But to outrage mobs, whether they're feminists, racists, or anyone else, the verifiable facts don't matter. Observable reality doesn't matter. Empirical truth doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is disparaging their target and concealing their disagreement by any means necessary. This includes verified threats of falsely accusing me of Me Too allegations and efforts to dox me. And when I made public verifiable evidence of this, I was outrage mobbed again. You see, all outrage mobs have is allegations without facts. Knowing this, their only tool is to double down, and then to continue doubling down. And when that doesn't work, they reframe their target as the aggressor, not for anything the target has done, but for the crime of disagreeing with their bigotry. And, spoiler alert, if I get doxed, I guarantee that those responsible are the same people who are advocating taking women's rights away. Now, speaking of bigotry, this video isn't about me. It's about the SPLC and its outrage mob campaign of harassment and bigotry against anyone who disagrees with them on ideological grounds, and how, after long last, they're being held accountable. This is the National Coalition for Men, and on January 26, 2019, they state, over the years, the Southern Poverty Law Center has classified several NCFM members and affiliated organizations as hateful or hate groups. Hate is one of the most destructive forces on the planet. To be clear, NCFM opposes hate in all forms, including that coming from the Southern Poverty Law Center. The SPLC appears to be another mouthpiece for misandrist ideologies. Organizations like SPLC are a primary cause of disharmony, disruption, and discord in this and other countries. What follows is Mr. Davis's analysis of the SPLC and a link to a John Stossel video in which Mr. Stossel adds to Mr. Davis's claims and our mutual agreement. Whatever good the SPLC may have done in the past is overshadowed in large part by their ignorance, poor investigative efforts, and catering to the politically correct regardless of fact or fantasy. Shameful are those who spread hate while professing to fight against it. And John Davis is an attorney. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate group that advances hatred of certain demographics based on their gender, race, and sexual orientation. The SPLC is a clearinghouse for false information that speciously supports their hate speech and the hate they impose on vulnerable demographics. Let's take a look at some of the SPLC's hate speech and hate tactics. Misogynists in the men's and fathers' rights movement have developed a set of claims about women to support their depictions of them as violent liars and manipulators of men. Some suggest that women attack men, even sexually, just as much as men attack women. Others claim that vast numbers of reported rapes of women, as much as half or even more, are fabrications designed to destroy men that they don't like in order to gain the upper hand in contested custody cases. This is one of the SPLC hate directives on its main website regarding men. Note how the SPLC invokes hate language to demonize and demean men and fathers. They begin their hate directive by trying to label men and fathers with a hate term, misogynists. This is a classic tactic of propagandists and hate mongers, and is the SPLC's imitation of Nazi propaganda used before and during World War II. This tactic is known as defining the enemy and justifying hatred of them. Karthik, I don't even know what that guy's last name, I'm not even going to try it. Well, I guess I will. Narayanasa, yeah, I just destroyed their name. I apologize if you're listening or whatever. So anyway, we're moving on. Analysis of Nazi Propaganda, a Behavioral Study, Holocaust in History, Literature, and Film, Harvard University, 2018. The SPLC begins by invoking hate speech against men in general, and fathers and men's rights activists in particular. The SPLC goes on in its hate speech and directive to lie about the incidents of women attacking men. The SPLC adopts Hitler's tactic of repeating a lie often enough until it becomes the truth. And again, this is something I've seen in recent history. To justify its hatred of men, the SPLC claims that it is wrong to suggest that women attack men as much as men attack women. This is more of the SPLC's hate speech directly contradicting modern research. It is now a scientific fact that women attack men more than men attack women, yet the SPLC tries to lie and hide that fact in order to justify its hatred of men. Harvard says 70% of domestic violence is committed by women against men. It is also now an established scientific fact that women sexually assault men and boys more than the other way around. The sexual victimization of men in America, new data challenge old assumptions. The SPLC hate tactics are clear. They disseminate false information to demonize and demean men, then justify their hatred of men based on endless repetition of that false information. This is precisely what Hitler and Goebbels did in Nazi Germany to manipulate the population against Jews. The SPLC then go on to try to give false rape accusers credibility, to facilitate their hateful tactics against men by denying the high incidence of false accusations of rape that exists in our culture. The purpose of this hate tactic by the SPLC is to empower false rape accusers to manipulate the system against men. We all know from well-established scientific studies that in the 80s and the 90s, the rate of false accusations of rape were at least 50 to 60%. Since those scientific studies were conducted, and there have been none to contradict them, the rate of rape convictions has plummeted, while the rate of rape accusations has skyrocketed. The rate of false accusations of rape in the U.S. may now be close to 90%. Then the SPLC continues its hate-mongering against men and fathers by suggesting that women who falsely accuse men in custody disputes are telling the truth. We know from scientific studies that women's accusations against men in custody disputes are at least 77% false. Dwyer, in 1986, reports similar statistics. She states that 77% of the divorce-linked allegations of sex abuse cases coming to the Human Sexuality Program at the University of Minnesota have turned out to be hoax cases. This was based on the opinion reached by the agency staff that the allegations were not accurate. Gardner, also in 1986, also observes that in some cases, a mother who is obsessed with hatred toward the father may bring the child to the point of having paranoid delusions about the father. A folie à deux relationship, I think that's how you say that. Folie à deux? It's French. My French is not good anymore. A relationship may evolve in which the child acquires the mother's paranoid delusions. Green states that such women are usually diagnosed as histrionic or paranoid personality disorders or paranoid schizophrenics. Clearly, with hate groups such as the SPLC having free license to disseminate hateful propaganda, groups seeking justice and enlightenment, such as men's rights and fathers' rights groups, have an uphill battle against such hate groups. Now, if you look at this here, you'll notice that like all these things that I'm highlighting here that are highlighted, like the sexual victimization of men in America, the IPT journal, and the Harvard study, these are all hyperlinks, and I will provide a link to this website, and you can click on those hyperlinks if you want to learn more information about the studies that were talked about in this attorney's letter. So now we have a little bit of background and perspective as well as context about the SPLC from a legal professional. Let's look at the Gavin McInnes lawsuit itself. So this is the lawsuit itself, and it was filed in the United States District Court, Middle District of Alabama. It is Gavin McInnes versus the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, you can see that this lawsuit doesn't have a case number, which means this is a brand new lawsuit. This is very common. This is not a court-conformed copy, but multiple outlets have reported on it, so I'm inclined to think that this is a legitimate lawsuit that I'm looking at right here. I will provide a link to the website I got. I think it was called thecourthousenews.com or courthousenews.com. I'll provide a copy of that website so you can read that particular article. And in that article is a link to this particular lawsuit that you can download and read. It is a 61-page lawsuit. I'm not going to read everything, but I am going to touch on some of it. So here's something I didn't know. But again, I don't really follow Gavin McInnes very much, but Mr. McInnes is an immigrant and is an avowed and vocal opponent of discrimination based on race, religion, or sexual preference, and of the ideologies and movements espousing extremism, nationalism, and white supremacy. I think he might be a nationalist, but I'm not convinced he's a white nationalist. I think he's more of an American nationalist, but, whatever. In an area where the dominant institutions demand and enforce cultural and political orthodoxy, however disguised as nonconformity, Mr. McInnes, his associates, and his family have been successfully targeted for personal and professional destruction by a self-appointed enforcer of such orthodoxy, defendant SPLC, to achieve SPLC's own ideological, political, and financial ends, as alleged further below. As detailed below, the primary method SPLC uses to achieve its goals and those of its donors is by identifying activists, political figures, and groups as targets or enemies of society, and designating its enemies as extremists, white supremacists, hate groups, and the like. Although the SPLC hate designations are not empirical statements of fact and are frequently entirely counterfactual, the SPLC hate designations are nonetheless intended by the SPLC and treated by the mainstream press, law enforcement, courts, and social media organizations not as the SPLC's opinion, but rather as objective, empirical, factual determinations. One way the SPLC uses the SPLC hate designation is to cause its victims to be deplatformed or deprived of access to online and in-person venues in which they were, prior to being deplatformed, able to express their views to those who choose to listen, or defunded, meaning blocking access from both social media-based crowdfunding sources and payment processors such as both online and traditional banks and credit card companies. By leveraging its remarkable power and influence to deplatform and defund targeted groups and individuals such as Mr. McInnes, SPLC deprives those with which it disagrees of venues in which their points of view may be expressed, of income, and ultimately of their most priceless possession, their reputations. The SPLC's campaign against Mr. McInnes is arguably the most successful employment of its system to personally destroy those it disagrees with, but who is in fact not an extremist on ideological grounds. But it's not its first. And then they go on and they give some examples of people that they've targeted. So we're jumping forward just a little bit. Mr. McInnes brings this action against SPLC for defaming him by use of the SPLC hate designations and publishing other false, damaging, and defamatory statements about him, as alleged in detail below, for its concerted, obsessive, and malicious actions taken to deplatform Mr. McInnes, for its tortious interference with his economic opportunities, and for intentionally interfering with his contractual relationships by causing, inter alia, the termination of Mr. McInnes's employment, and almost complete deplatforming and defunding and subjecting him to employment discrimination based on his lawful non-employment recreational activities. It's kind of interesting because these are things that I actually talked about. I actually talked about tortious interference with business relationships. So it's kind of nice to actually have information in my videos confirmed in this particular lawsuit. Like I said, apparently somebody's paying attention. The SPLC's defamatory, false, and misleading designation of Mr. McInnes as a hate figure is purposefully deceitful and intended to tarnish Mr. McInnes's reputation, disparage Mr. McInnes's good name and work, inflict harm and financial damage, reduce Mr. McInnes's goodwill and standing in the community, expose Mr. McInnes, his family, and anyone else associated with him to public scorn, harassment, intimidation, and potential violence, and to denigrate, malign, and ridicule Mr. McInnes to countless individuals and potential employers and partners around the world. Holy shit. Go to the link, download this lawsuit. This lawsuit is a template for anybody who is defamed. Listen, if you have a business interest, download this lawsuit. Oh my God, this lawsuit is a template. Now, I skimmed it before, but now I'm reading it in more detail. Download the lawsuit. This is a template of how to sue people who are just going after you to defame you for no particular reason. So just download the lawsuit, read it. If you're a legal professional, I'll be putting links to all these lawsuits as I do these videos. Download them. These are templates. These are clinics on how to file a complaint for this sort of thing. This lawsuit's awesome. So here they're talking about Proud Boys activities on page 8 of the lawsuit. This is pretty damning. Documented Proud Boys activities include collection and distribution of Christmas presents for toy drives in Oklahoma and Michigan, raising funds for military charities in Central Texas, assisting with emergency fire relief arising from the California Camp Fire, distributing food and essentials to homeless veterans in Boston on Veterans Day, rounding up food for a food bank in South Florida, and collating and shipping care packages to overseas troops from Michigan. Yep. Sounds like Proud Boys are a terrorist group to me. It's freaking retarded. Emblematic of Proud Boys' philosophy is bylaws state, a person that believes in the inherent supremacy of any one race over another, or who is a member of any organization promoting the supremacy of any one race over another, may not become or remain a member of this fraternity. This includes, but is not limited to, any person who currently identifies as a white nationalist, white supremacist, or alt-right, or any person who is a member of an organization identifying as such. Similarly, members of terrorist organizations or cells, including but not limited to Antifa, are prohibited from membership in the fraternity. So this is Proud Boys bylaws. Well, there goes the whole idea that Proud Boys is a racist group. So that's done. I don't think that the SPLC is going to contest that because this is their bylaws. They even have a section here called The Disappeared on page 21, which I think is relevant to YouTubers and to people who are fundraising online. A recent example is the David Horowitz Freedom Center, a conservative think tank once designated as an SPLC hate group in 2018. Both Visa and MasterCard revoked the center's ability to accept donations by credit card. Throughout 2018, SPLC's designation of a person or group as extremist or a hate group have resulted in SPLC's targets being cut off from accepting donations and processing purchases of fundraising merchandise via credit cards issued by MasterCard and Visa, and through online payment processors, PayPal and Stripe, online crowdfunding mechanisms Patreon and GoFundMe, and online content monetization systems such as Google AdSense. Thus, the SPLC's deplatforming strategy extends beyond the mere mailing and online campaigns and the placement of hapless targets on the hate map. SPLC's deplatforming program is, I think it's dependent on the cooperation of a cowed corporate sector, virtue signaling social media managers, and a technocratic stranglehold on virtually every organ of public and political influence in the United States. According to a June of 2018 report by Peter Hasson, 4 of the world's biggest social media platforms, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Twitter, have established working partnerships with SPLC, which is deemed as an external expert that informs the platform's hate speech policies. Upon information and belief, the application of an SPLC hate designation automatically renders a charity ineligible for Amazon Smile donations. Similarly, Twitter lists SPLC as a safety partner and acknowledges that SPLC advises Twitter in a manner not disclosed by either Twitter or SPLC to combat hateful conduct and harassment. Google, which owns YouTube, uses SPLC to help police hate speech on YouTube as part of YouTube's Trusted Flagger program. Let me tell you the significance of this. So the best part about this particular lawsuit, again, download it. This lawsuit is gold. This is a template. Because he's identified partners working with the SPLC, he's identified Amazon, Twitter, Google, YouTube, Facebook. Now he can conduct discovery on all of these organizations and get all the emails and communications between Facebook, Amazon, Google, YouTube, Twitter, all those organizations, and SPLC. He can actually make all of this public during the discovery phase of this lawsuit. And there's nothing any of these organizations can do about it. I mean, they might be able to drag the lawsuit out a little bit, but eventually, unless they've got a justifiable reason otherwise, they're not going to want to do it. And my guess is these organizations are going to want this to go away so quick, it's not even funny. He's going to let discovery determine the damages. The advantage, I think, of this in a lot of lawsuits is that sometimes you ask for too much, other times you ask for too little. Whereas you can do complete discovery and say, well, we're just trying to figure out where the damages are. And then you can just start digging deep into discovery. I think the most important part of this lawsuit is going to be the discovery phase, because he has pled that SPLC is conspiring with big tech. And that is completely damning. And it's going to allow him to conduct discovery because big tech has openly said they're working with SPLC. I think this is damning, and I think that what they're going to do is they're going to do everything in their power to try to shut him down. And here's the funny part. There's a conservative Supreme Court, and honestly, there's a good possibility that Ginsburg's not coming back. Nobody's seen her, I guess, in a while, and I know she's recovering, but she's not young anymore. So if this goes to the Supreme Court, she might not be there. There might be a new judge in place. And if that new justice is conservative, then there's a good chance that Gavin McInnes is going to win. Now, to reiterate, a few months ago, I called for the SPLC and others to be sued for creating outrage mobs and dishonestly defaming those they disagree with. In my video, The SPLC Funds Terrorists, I showed how the SPLC leadership admits that they label hate groups not based on facts or conduct, but based on ideological disagreement alone. Then the SPLC works to deplatform and destroy their targets, which is exactly the facts that are being alleged by Gavin McInnes in his lawsuit. So, after I called for the targets of the SPLC's outrage mob to sue them for months, as you can see, it's finally happening. Apparently, someone listened. Someone did their homework. They verified my concerns. And now, the SPLC is the subject of at least 3 lawsuits, which this video series will cover. So now we've seen the Gavin McInnes lawsuit. In parts 2 and 3, we'll be taking a closer look into the other lawsuits filed against the SPLC. However, don't be surprised if between now and the time that I publish part 3 of this series, if SPLC gets sued by someone else. You see, there's blood in the water, and the SPLC has more than enough money to compensate its victims for the damages they've wrongfully done to their reputations and their lives. You see, today is a new day, and more red-pilled men of conscience are now openly standing in opposition to outrage mobs like the SPLC and others who foment lies, character assassinations, ad hom attacks, and accusations without evidence against anyone who calls them out on their hypocrisy and dysfunctional ideologies. It's funny, though, because I think the most amusing thing about this is it's the fact that detractors in the red pill manosphere loudly and incorrectly claim that men going their own way are cowards. Yet it was me, a guy going his own way, who publicly called for accountability against this type of bigotry, while all these supposedly successful red pill alpha bro detractors hid silently on the sidelines, scared, waiting for the mean words to go away. But partially as a result of my call to sue these bigots into the Stone Ages, people are waking up, and they're holding outrage mobs like the SPLC accountable for their bigotry, despite the silence from the majority of the red pill manosphere. So, what's the takeaway? Like I said in my last video, deer run, warriors fight. And a man's actions alone, not his tattoos, not his clothing, and certainly not any metrosexual vanity, let everyone know who's the warrior and who's the deer. I'm DDJ, and this is your dose of misandry today.